Hey, this is Mike from Run Testers, and this is our multi-tester review of the Garmin Enduro 2. So before getting into that all-important run testing, here's what you need to know about the Garmin Enduro and what's changed from the first Enduro. We'll start with pricing first, with the Enduro 2 coming in at £929 in the UK and $1,099 in the US. There's now only a titanium bezel model, with Garmin dropping the stainless steel bezel option from the first Enduro. It does still measure in with a 51mm case that's jumped up slightly in overall thickness. You're still getting it bundled with one of Garmin's nylon straps as well. There's a 1.4-inch 280 by 280 always-on transflected display once again, with now added touchscreen functionality. Garmin is also introducing an LED torch that it says is brighter than the one included on the Garmin Fenix 7X. Feature-wise, everything we got on the Enduro 1 is on the Enduro 2, with some notable extras. There's now multi-continent TOPO maps preloaded and a built-in music player, which didn't feature on the first Enduro. You're also getting Garmin's new GNSS multiband mode to improve outdoor tracking accuracy, along with its Sat IQ technology to intelligently pick the best GPS power mode depending on your environment. That's to help preserve battery life and still deliver strong accuracy. Garmin is also adding features like grade adjusted pace to better understand how to vary pace over tougher terrain, a visual race predictor, and new HRV status and training readiness insights to make sure you're training at the optimal times. In terms of battery life, you can expect up to 34 days in smartwatch mode or 46 days in solar mode. It's 110 hours in GPS mode, up to 78 hours with multiband in use, and there's also an expedition mode that can track up to 77 days.
So the design of the Enduro 2 is obviously very similar to the Fenix 7 range, and it's got a similar kind of bulk to it, but it is a fairly light watch, and I had no real problems wearing it 24/7, and I do think the little yellow-green accents you get on the watch do make it slightly more attractive than the Fenix 7X in the kind of standard colorway there. Other design changes are the torch, which obviously is a bit brighter than the one on the Fenix 7X. To be honest, I'm not someone who goes out a lot in the dark. I don't like the dark, but I do use the torch to get downstairs in the middle of the night if my toddler kicks off or I've left the cat out or something, and it is a handy little feature to have available there. And I think it would be useful when camping as an extra torch or when running, but I think you probably want another torch with you as well if you were running in the dark. The screen is solid. It's got the same issues that other solar Garmins have, which is the screen just sits a little bit deeper away from the face of the watch, I think. So it's not quite as clear when you're in dappled light or under tree cover as kind of non-solar Garmins, or indeed the Epix 2, which is a lot brighter and clearer, especially when using maps and you're in a forest or something. You'll get a lot clearer reading of where to go from the Epix. But the screen is good, and it's it's clear enough, and if it's the only watch you'll use, you'll become perfectly accustomed to it. It's just when I was wearing it at the same time as the Epix 2, it was clearly a bit brighter on the Epix.
So in terms of the design of the Enduro 2, I mean, it's not massively different from the first Enduro. I think the key thing here is that Garmin's decided to only do one version. Now, I've used both the stainless steel bezel version and the titanium version of the original Enduro. The stainless steel one definitely felt a bit heavier, noticeably heavier when you're out running with it. So I think the fact that they've gone for a titanium version only makes sense to me. Though I will say that the weight and the thickness has changed. It is a little bit thicker, and the weight kind of sits a little bit more in between the stainless steel bezel and the titanium bezel version. It's still relatively light, but you do notice that it's on when you're running. It doesn't disappear like something like the Forerunner 955, and from some of the other Fenix models, you do feel that it's around, even though it is in that titanium build ultimately. There are some kind of changes that, refinements in the design, I think, make it slightly nicer. I think I quite like the accent on the main kind of start button. But ultimately you're getting, the same resolution screen. It's still a transflected display. It's nice and visible to see, particularly in bright outdoor light, and that's really what those displays are about. Personally, it's a bit too much watch for me personally, but I think, if you liked the titanium version of the Enduro and you wanted it to be slightly tweaked but ultimately stay true to that design, then that's what you'll get. Now, the Velcro strap and the nylon strap, I love. I think it's really comfortable to wear. It helps drop that weight a little bit more, makes that, the size of this watch a little bit more manageable. Now, with the first watch, I did start to see wear with the Velcro kind of stickiness on my watch. I don't know if that's down to kind of just general wear, using it in the water for swims, which is what what I used to track, when I was using it to track my run, pool swims and open water swims. And from that point of view, I haven't seen any issues yet, but I would be wary about whether that's going to happen again. I can't see any differences in terms of this nylon strap in terms of what I used in the first Enduro. Hopefully it isn't the case, but it is something I'm a bit wary about, because these nylon straps are not cheap. You can get third-party ones, but ultimately if you want an official Garmin one, they're not cheap to kind of replace. So for me, it's a big watch. There's some kind of nice little refined tweaks in terms of design. I'm glad it's just the titanium version as well, but it is a big watch, a bit like the 7X. So if you want an idea of what it's like to live with, that's kind of the best comparison. But it is in titanium, and it felt okay. You just know it's on. If you're tracking sleep, you're going to know it's on runs or longer runs. It's not disappearing. But yeah, ultimately it's been okay for me. I just think it's not a massive leap on from the first Enduro. If you've used the first Enduro, the titanium version, you'll be very familiar in terms of what this is going to feel like to run with as well.
Garmin's multiband GPS has generally been very good for me, and that's been the case with the Enduro 2. I first tried it in the Sat IQ mode, where it automatically switches between different GPS modes to see if that would save me any battery. And I didn't really notice any battery improvements, and there were times when the GPS was just a little bit less good than in full multiband mode, in terms of I could look at the track and see it wasn't quite as accurate as a multiband watch. And in multiband mode, it's matched up well with an Epix in general. I still think the Epix 2 is just the most accurate one I've used, and it must be like a watch by watch, case by case basis. But it's been remarkably good for me, the Epix 2, and a couple of runs it did catch things that the Enduro 2 didn't. And I had one run with the Enduro 2 where it kind of displaced my entire GPS track, like 5 or 6 meters to the right, so I've got a very weird looking GPS track, but the actual pacing and distance logged was always very good with the watch. And I think, multiband from Garmin is about as good as it gets on that front at the moment. So my kind of general rule of thumb with Garmin's and optical heart rate is that the bigger, the bulkier the watch, the less good the HR is. It moves around more on the wrist, and you just get, it just struggles to hold a consistent reading. And that was more or less the case with the Enduro 2 for a large part, especially as I've been using it in warm weather when HR tends to be a little bit more accurate on the wrist. It was fine on easy runs, steady runs, progression runs, but on intervals it would lag behind a HR strap. And I had one run where, even just on a fairly normal run, it was out of whack at the start of the run for a fairly long period, and it was enough to move the run into a different category in Garmin's training analysis. So it became like a tempo run instead of just a base run, and that affects all your kind of training analysis stats, which are very good on the watch. So I would definitely be pairing a chest strap. It's the kind of advice we always tend to give, and with a watch this big, I think it's very much necessary. I mean, if you have a bigger wrist than me, like a thicker wrist, you might get a more secure fit and a better HR reading than I did, but spending this much on a watch, that training analysis is great. I would get a chest strap. So the mapping and navigation features on Garmin's in general are superb. I love using them. I love the very clear maps and directions, and Climb Pro in particular is just great when you are on a hilly route to know how long and you have until the top of this current climb and when the next descent is and stuff like that. And it was a big loss on the original Enduro for sure. So I'm very pleased it's on the Enduro 2. Using them on this watch has been as great as on all other Garmin's, I think, with the exception of the Epix 2, where it's a bit better because that brighter AMOLED screen is fantastic for showing your maps. But yeah, really clear directions. Great to be able to log waypoints and have the upper head feature if you're using it for ultras. So I think it was an absolute must add to the Enduro from Garmin, and I'm pleased they've done it. It's much more important than music, in my opinion. And yeah, it means this watch is now, much more of a strong contender for those who are willing to spend big in Garmin's range. So with the Enduro 2, you're getting the full suite of Garmin's kind of training analysis options, and that includes training readiness, which I consider the most exciting new training feature that Garmin's brought to its watches in a long time. I've really enjoyed using it since it landed on the Forerunner 955 early this year. Basically acts as a one-stop shop to give you a very simple color-coded rating of how ready you are to train that day, and then you can dive into all the individual factors behind that rating if you want to, like sleep, your recovery time, recent training load, heart rate variability, that kind of thing. And it's great because it's really geared towards sporty people, and I like using Readiness on things like the Aura Ring, and I've used it on other devices in the past, but they have taken a more kind of holistic view, whereas the Garmin seems like laser focused on what I want to know, which is, am I ready to go and train that day? How ready am I? What kind of session am I doing? Yeah, so I think it works really well, and there's more detail there if you want it, but actually I tend to not dive into that other detail anymore. I used to look at things like my training load on Garmin's and all that kind of thing, but now it's just the Readiness, quick look. If it's about where I expect it to be, I move on with my day, great. And if it's not, I go in and dive in and see what's kind of been going wrong and why it's not there.
So in terms of that core run tracking experience, I mean, It's very, very good. I mean, it's everything that, you know, I got in the Enduro, or I found in the Enduro that you're getting in the Enduro 2. Crucially, you are getting mapping, which, you know, I found was a surprise in terms of not having that in the Enduro. I mean, you had the kind of more basic breadcrumb navigation you have on cheaper kind of Garmin Forerunners. So now you have got full mapping support on the Garmin Enduro 2. You have got the multiband mode, which I think is very, very good. You know, I use the Epix 2 as my day-to-day watch, and the multiband performance is so good. I mean, it's head and shoulders above anything that I've kind of used in terms of kind of distance tracking accuracy. So it's good that that is here. But I think also it's important that along with that multiband kind of GNSS mode, you are getting the kind of SAT IQ technology, which is, you know, is ultimately saying we're going to make sure you're using the right GPS mode in the right environment where you're really going to benefit from it. So if you're going to be in a congested, you know, densely populated kind of area where it's tall buildings or forest or woods, then it will switch to that multi-band mode. But if you're in an open area where you don't need that accuracy, now I think particularly, you know, if you're an endurance athlete or an ultra kind of runner, then you probably don't need that level of accuracy. You can kind of go down to that kind of low power mode and make sure you still get that good GPS data, but you're also making sure you're preserving the battery life as well. And I think that's really important here, because everything else that you're getting here is pretty much what you would find on a top end Fenix, or on a kind of something like the Epix as well. Everything in terms of the training analysis, all the features that you have access to. Performance wise, you know, things like heart rate monitoring, I think for steady pace runs, absolutely fine. Slightly falters at high intensity, but I think, you know, it's a little bit down to the size of this watch. I kind of have that issue with bigger watches in general, and I think, you know, you always compare to an external heart rate sensor, and that's generally what I've been doing and what I do anyway. So if you want that accurate data, that's what I would suggest doing. I like the fact that you now have training readiness here as well, which is something that was kind of introduced to kind of some of Garmin's other most recent watches, and it's rolled out to this watch as well. And I really like that as a feature. I think it's, you know, it's very well kind of presented in terms of that information and understanding, and why, you know, it's pulling through kind of sleep and things like acute load metrics, and your kind of stress, and how that can kind of inform whether you should train, whether you should take it easy, whether you've recovered properly as well. I think it's useful enough. Obviously, it's a big watch to go to sleep with, so, you know, you have to be comfortable with it tracking sleep and going to bed with it, and it's a big watch to monitor sleep. But the sleep monitoring has been better for me. I think in general, Garmin sleep tracking has been better. It still does have that tendency to record a little over-report in terms of sleep duration, but I think the reliability is getting a lot better. So for me, the run tracking experience is very, very good. What I would expect from a top-end Garmin. The mapping is good. You know, I miss the kind of color screen that you get on the Epix in terms of that, but there's enough color in that screen, you know, from the transfixed display to kind of elevate elements of your mapping. And the touch screen can be used in some of that kind of navigation, but ultimately you still have to use the buttons as well. But, you know, in terms of that core running tracking experience, it's very, very good. What you expect from a top-end Garmin. Mapping is there now. I think multiband is there as well. But crucially, I think you've got that SAT IQ technology, which I think is going to help you pick or make sure you use the right GPS mode to make sure you get the best out of the battery life in this watch, which is really what, you know, stands this out from the other Garmin watches. It's about giving you huge battery life, but also giving you the, you know, access to all those features that, you know, most Garmin's, top-end Garmin's have access to. So yeah, really good run tracking experience for me, and the added features make it a better watch, and definitely a better running watch as well. So in terms of battery life, I think this is actually a really interesting one, because I've gone back and looked at the battery life numbers in general for the Garmin Enduro. When I was using the Enduro, potentially I was able to get close to a month essentially away from charging. That was a regular tracking. Now with the Garmin Enduro 2, it's interesting because I think the day-to-day battery life has actually dropped, and that's kind of what I've seen. But when you are using the kind of GPS modes, or looking at the GPS modes and the kind of battery life that Garmin is promising, it's actually bigger, significantly bigger than what we got on the Enduro. So if you're looking at it from that point of view, I was probably getting a week less than what I got with the Enduro, because I'm using all the other features day to day, like notifications and continuous monitoring of heart rate, and those things that I do actually kind of pay attention to. And then also there's things like training readiness as well, which obviously is going to knock the battery life too. So I think if you are just purely using this for tracking, you're really stripping things back in terms of what you're using. then you probably are going to get really strong tracking battery life. But I think day to day, if you are using those smartwatch features, then actually I think it is a bit of a drop off from the original Garmin Enduro. So the battery life is a really interesting one for me. It really depends on how you're using it, but I do think personally for me, when I am looking at those day-to-day features and wearing it all day, there has been a drop off in terms of what I've experienced. Maybe it's probably closer to kind of 2.5, 3 weeks as opposed to the month that I got on Enduro in my testing, but it's still long. But I think there's definitely a difference in terms of how that battery life has improved. And obviously with the solar charging, you know, I just think it's a little bit irrelevant unless you are spending a lot of time outdoors and you can expose yourself, or really the watch, to the kind of conditions that it needs to really, you know, benefit from having that solar, you know, power technology that's in here, but through the kind of power glass lens that Garmin uses here. So from that point of view, I think the battery life is better in some ways, some in others. It just depends on how you're using it. But from a tracking point of view, it's going to be better. Multiband is still going to hit the battery life, even when you know, that's why it's important that SAT IQ technology is there as well, to kind of make sure you're using it at the right times to make sure you get the longest battery life out from this watch. So it's good. I don't think it's as good as the original Garmin Enduro in some modes, but in other modes it is better, and you are going to see an improvement in terms of battery performance.
So battery life on the Enduro is obviously a star feature, and in my experience I've had the multiband enabled the entire time, notifications on, running over 100k a week, and then doing other activities like yoga and strength sessions and the odd outdoor bike ride with GPS as well. It's been lasting me about 15 to 16 to 17 days on a charge, which is, you know, really good. And that during testing was in quite sunny conditions in the UK, so I was probably getting a little bit of a solar benefit as well. So compared like head to head when I was using this watch against the Fenix 7X under the same conditions, it was lasting me maybe 4 to 5 days longer, the Enduro 2 was. And then the Epix 2 lasts me about 4 days on a charge in similar conditions. So you are getting, you know, more battery life from the Enduro 2. And I think if you did fewer outdoor activities than I was, or played around with your settings and didn't use the multiband GPS quite so much, you could look at more like 3-4 weeks from it. But I think the big extension you're getting with the 2 over the Enduro 1 is in individual activities rather than general use. So if you do want to go out and do, you know, 150 hours of GPS tracking in the sun, you've got that possibility here. If you're lining up a multi-day adventure and you really don't want to try and charge your watch at all, the new Enduro 2 is the best option in Garmin's range for battery life. That's really where it's at its best. So if you're just looking for fantastic day-to-day battery life, you can get that from the Fenix 7X, the old Enduro, and you'll probably be looking at, you know, 2 weeks, maybe longer, depending on your use. But if you are looking at those epic individual adventures, the Enduro 2 has better battery life than anything from Garmin.
So verdict for me on the Garmin Enduro 2, I think ultimately it is a very expensive Garmin watch, and it's hard to really, I think the problem Garmin has here is how do you distinguish this from the Fenix watch? And I think the main thing is tracking battery life, because I think smartwatch battery life or day-to-day battery life actually, you know, isn't massively, you know, improved in terms of what you're going to experience. But in terms of those raw GPS or, you know, kind of tracking modes, then I think you are going to get more battery life. But then other than that, there's not a massive amount that's different from the Fenix watches for me, and you're paying a lot of money for that extra battery life ultimately. So for me, if I was picking, I think, you know, I would go for a Fenix watch. I think you'll get enough in terms of that battery life, in terms of that tracking performance, in terms of the features that you're getting overall in the analysis, everything there. They're pretty much here what you get in Enduro, but it's on those watches for cheaper. And those will offer better value, I would say, ultimately, and still give you plenty of battery life as well, you know, potentially weeks as well. I think the problem Garmin has here is it really needs to add features on the Enduro, I think, to really make it stand out from those other watches. At the moment, it doesn't feel like there's enough there for me. It can track for a long time, but ultimately everything else you can get on a Fenix watch. And if it was me, it was my money, save your money, go for a Fenix watch. If you had an Enduro, you loved the Enduro, you wanted, you know, you're looking at the Enduro 2, then there are improvements. It is a better watch, but I just think you're probably better served going for a Fenix, paying less money, still getting good battery life, maybe not as long, but you're getting good battery life ultimately, and you're getting all the features you get in the Enduro 2 as well. So yeah, that's my take on the Enduro 2. I like using it, but ultimately I think all I was thinking throughout this is that you could probably spend less and get an Enduro, get a Fenix 7 series watch instead. Oh, and maybe even get an Epix, which I think you're going to get a color screen, you're going to get a nicer feel in terms of that mapping support, and maybe not as long battery life, but I think for a lot of people it might be enough in terms of their regular training and covering their regular trains over a month as well.
So verdict is a pretty simple one here for me, in that the Enduro 2, really is a Fenix 7X Ultra. It's very much an extension of the Fenix range these days. It's the biggest battery life, but otherwise it's a similar looking watch with the same features on it. And it's so expensive that you really got to, I think, know in advance what you're going to use that battery for to justify spending the money on the Enduro 2. If you just love the idea of big battery life, then it's a lot of money for that. You can get very good battery life from something in the Fenix range. So if you are planning these multi-day expeditions, these incredible ultra adventures where that, I'm really going to be hitting 80 hours of GPS use in a few days here, I want the watch that's going to be able to handle it best, then it's the Enduro 2. In most other use case scenarios, I think the Fenix would be the more sensible option, as it's a bit cheaper. And then if you're someone like me who's a marathoner, doesn't need those very long individual battery life stints, and I'm happy to charge my watch for a few days, I think the Epix 2 screen is a worthwhile upgrade on the battery life of the Enduro 2. I think just day-to-day life is so much nicer when you've got that bright screen, and using the maps is better as well, which is a big thing for me. And a little bit more charging, doesn't annoy me that much because you're still getting 4 or 5 days on a charge. But yeah, if you want to go a few weeks without a charge, then you'd be looking more at the Fenix or the Enduro 2. And I think in terms of pure value, the 4 and a 955 really should come into the conversation as well. It's half the price of the Enduro 2, and you're getting the same features. It's a lighter plastic body, which isn't as nice looking, but isn't bad looking at all, in my opinion. And it is a lighter watch, which is nice as well for running for long periods, or if you're doing triathlons, that kind of thing. And that tends to last me about a week of battery on a charge. So lots of options in Garmin's range now. The best value is a 955, the best screen's the Epix 2, and I think that's the one I suggest most road runners would probably enjoy the most. Then the Fenix and the Enduro are monsters in terms of battery life, and really choosing within that range would just be a case of how much battery life do you need and how much are you willing to spend to get it.
So there you have it. That is our take on the Garmin Enduro 2. Now, if you've got any running focused questions about this watch, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about our latest videos. And yeah, we'll see you in the next Run Testers video.